Hello there my RPG lovers and welcome to another video. Every once in a while a certain game comes out and it manages to make a huge impact on the whole genre. The last 3 games that had a huge impact on the open world design in general were Skyrim, The Witcher 3 and Zelda Breath of the Wild. Even if for some reason you absolutely hate those 3 games, you just can't ignore them, especially if you're a game developer who plans to create an action-adventure open world game. Immortals Fenyx Rising is heavily influenced by Zelda Breath of the Wild, and it doesn't try to hide that for a second. Another big influence comes from Assassin's Creed Odyssey, which is not surprising at all, because this game is made by the same team. Talking about all this influence from other games is interesting, but to be honest, it's not really important in the grand scheme of things. The real question is, does Fenyx Rising have enough unique features which will help it distinguish itself from all these other games, and more importantly, is it fun to play? Well, let's find out.
Localgos! Localgos, can you hear me? You've gone cold. What magic is this?
Greek mythology has always been a desirable setting for all kinds of games. Fenyx Rising is built on this premise, but in a very comedic way. You play as mortal called Phoenix, and you're basically just a puppet of the gods. The whole story is narrated by Zeus and Prometheus, and the dialogue between these 2 gods is always interesting to listen.
You chained me to this rock and fed my liver to an eagle!
Out of love!
The game doesn't take itself too seriously. Basically every dialogue situation is done in a comedic way like this.
Is where the gods get their dental exams?
No, it's where we rip off our skin to change our appearance.
And everything else in the game kindly supports this goofy narrative. There are a couple of semi-serious moments just to break the monotony. The main villain of the game, Typhon, is a good example. But even his lines are delivered in evil over-the-top way by tension. And pretty much no one takes him too seriously most of the time. He can be really annoying sometimes, but we'll get to that. Typhon stole the essence of 4 Greek gods, and your job is to help them by getting their essence back. Your ultimate goal is to defeat the Typhon, and you're going to need the help of the gods. That's basically it when it comes to the main story. Phoenix's interaction with all the gods in the game was pretty interesting to watch. The gods are not themselves without their essence, so they behave a lot different than they should. There is no need to talk about the story in depth, it's designed to be relaxing, simple, and to put a smile on your face every once in a while.
You can't solve the stars. The stars solve you. At least that's what a seer named Miss Cleo once told me. And I won't tell you what happened after that. But those stars were bright.
She stole your money.
She did, yes. But I turned her into a juniper berry. So overall, not a bad night.
The gameplay loop is far more important in this game, so let's talk about that. The open world in Fenyx Rising is a joy to explore, both visually and gameplay wise. Every zone in the game is built around your ability to climb and glide, so there is a lot of vertical exploration. I hold this style of open world design in high regard, but only if the exploration itself feels rewarding. And for the most part, the exploration in Fenyx Rising is definitely rewarding. You will find chests with armors and weapons, different challenges that reward you with the currency to progress your character, a lot of puzzles in the open and in the vaults, which are basically dungeons with puzzles and platforming elements. My favorite kind of challenges in the game are those where you need to guide your arrow through various obstacles. There's something about them that I found really satisfying, and some of them are actually really challenging. And my least favorite types of challenges are those where you need to repeat a certain tune. I found them really tedious and boring, and I only did a couple of them in total. Luckily, if you hate a certain type of challenge on the map, you can just ignore it, because there are plenty of other challenges that you can do. By the way, if you hate puzzles, you probably won't like this game because there are a ton of them. It's a huge part of the gameplay loop. When it comes to the difficulty of the puzzles and challenges in the game, I think they did a pretty good job to make them challenging but not tedious. The difficulty of the puzzles will vary. The most challenging puzzles can be found in the main vaults, where you need to retrieve the essence of the gods. Or at least they will take you the longest time to solve because they are huge. That being said, I never had a situation where I got stuck more than a couple of minutes to figure out what I need to do in most of the vaults. But let's be clear on this, I'm not playing a lot of games with puzzle solving elements, so I don't feel really knowledgeable in order to judge this element of the game properly. I did enjoy my time with pretty much every vault in the game though, so take that as you will. I like how many vaults had a challenging enemy to fight, and some vaults even had a horde mode, where you need to fight a lot of enemies at once. I wish I found more of those vaults because they were really enjoyable. That's probably because I prefer action over puzzles in general, which brings us to the combat system. The combat experience in Fenyx Rising is a lot smoother than I expected. The influence of recent Assassin's Creed games is quite obvious here when it comes to a couple of combat mechanics. For example, the defense meter is one of the most important features in combat, and when you manage to break it, the enemy gets stunned. Assassin's Creed Valhalla has almost identical mechanic. Same goes for slowing down the time on a perfect dodge, or when you successfully parry the attack. The guiding arrow is another example, as well as special enemy attacks which are unblockable, and so on. On the first sight, the combat might seem to be a hack and slash fiesta, where you just mindlessly spam attacks. But it's not like that at all, especially in the early stages of the game. Your abilities rely on stamina usage, but your regular attacks and your dodges don't. You have a sword, which is used for light attacks, and you have an axe for heavy AoE attacks, which inflict defense damage as well. I think the bow gameplay was a bit underwhelming and unimpactful. It feels like the main role of the bow was the guiding arrow ability, which you're going to use a lot for solving puzzles. In fights, not so much, unless you find a bow with a really interesting perk. You will find some cool upgrades for the bow when you help one of the gods, but that didn't fix the problem in my opinion. This could feel different on the normal difficulty, I'm not sure, but it certainly didn't feel really good on hard. I guess the ranged gameplay could be easily exploited, so that might be the reason for the low damage. Anyway, regular attacks with your melee weapons have a simple combo system, but what makes them interesting is the ability to mix them in a couple of ways. The last hit in the combo is very powerful, but it's not easy to trigger because you can easily get interrupted by receiving damage. Which can be a pretty common situation because you'll always fight at least a couple of enemies at once. The game rewards you for not getting hit and constantly doing damage by increasing your combo count. After a certain threshold, your damage will increase, but it resets whenever you get hit. It's a high risk, high reward mechanic. I think all of these combat mechanics are pretty good in general because they work as intended and the combat feels really fluid. Especially when you get the hang of it and you realize that you can connect a lot of your hits and abilities together. It feels really good when you manage to do that, it's almost like you're dancing with your enemies. You can learn a couple of godly abilities, which are basically your strongest attacks. My favorite ability was the hammer, which I rushed to upgrade to its full potential. For an action-adventure game, the options you have when it comes to progressing your character are decent. Well, maybe options is not a good way to describe it, because you can pretty much get all the upgrades as long as you have the currency. The only real decision you have to make is what skills to get first. Fenyx Rising is not an RPG, but it has a couple of RPG features that add a decent amount of depth to character progression. You have 2 slots for armor pieces and 3 slots for weapons. The itemization in general is really simple but enjoyable. There are a lot of items that you can find, as well as different skins for the same item. This game also has a transmogrification. This game also has a transmogrification system. Oh, fuck it. And it works just like in AC Odyssey and AC Valhalla. This means that you can customize the look of your armors and weapons by applying a different look of the item that you obtained beforehand. I have to mention that this game also has a store where you can buy some items for real money as well. But you can get the same currency for those items by solving specific quests that you can find on the boards. It's there as an option, I guess, but you can totally ignore it if you wish. Every item that you can equip have 2 unique perks. The effects on these perks can range from really simple to really specific. For example, they can give you some bonuses related to your combo meter, a certain attack in the combo, and things like that. It's a really simple feature, but it makes the combat a bit more interesting. Especially if you start fighting in a way to trigger those perks. You don't have to do it, but it's nice having that option. Increasing your stamina and health is pretty straightforward. As long as you complete vaults, you'll get the item you need for increasing your stamina. I think stamina is a lot more important than health because you'll need it for climbing, using abilities, gliding, swimming, riding, and so on. Health is also important, of course, and I think it's a bit easier to upgrade than stamina because the item you need can be found all over the map. When it comes to other utilities, you will get a bird after following the main quest for a bit. The bird can do some special attacks and you will find different skins and abilities for the birds throughout the map. I think that Ubisoft has a thing for birds ever since Origins. Another thing that's really important to get right in action-adventure games is enemy variety. And fortunately, the game did a pretty good job with NPCs you're going to fight. Each zone in the game has unique enemies, and you can find a lot of unique boss fights on the whole map. I always look forward to these fights because they usually have something interesting to drop. A lot of these fights felt good because NPCs have unique skill sets and patterns that you have to learn, but there are a couple of situations where bosses have almost identical moveset like something you already fought. Or at least they have just a couple of more extra attacks they can perform and everything else is pretty much the same. But you can find a lot of unique fights in basically every zone by just exploring, and that was one of my most favorite things to do. The bosses you fight throughout the main storyline are interesting, although some of those fights were a bit underwhelming. I much more enjoyed fighting legendary monsters throughout the island, and those were optional fights. For an action-adventure game, I think there is a decent amount of depth when it comes to combat mechanics. The difficulty you choose will be a huge factor when it comes to your combat experience. I played the game on hard, and it offers a pretty balanced experience, if not a bit too forgiving when it comes to the combat. You actually have to unlock the hardest difficulty by beating the game at least once. I mentioned before that Typhon can be really annoying, so let me explain that. Every once in a while there is a certain event that happens on the map. Typhon basically creates a big firestorm, and he also sends a strong raid to kill you. Each zone in the game has a different raid that haunts you, and the only way to permanently get rid of them is to find their vault in the zone and kill them. This sounds really cool, and the first couple of times when it happens, it can be really interesting. But it can quickly become really frustrating and unnecessary. The actual fights against raids are pretty good, I'm not talking about that. But you will need to progress your character quite a bit in order to actually kill them in the vault if you want the event to stop. The event just happens too frequently, that's my main problem with this. It's one of those rare moments where I actually got frustrated while playing these games, so I have to mention it. It could have been a lot better because it definitely makes the world feel more dynamic. And the last thing that's definitely worth mentioning is the AI and destructible environments. The AI behavior is really good in general. I like how certain NPCs like giants can use objects around them to hurt you. And there is friendly fire between NPCs, and you can use that to your advantage in fights. It's pretty hilarious sometimes. Fenyx Rising is not exactly my type of a game, but I did enjoy my time with it. Even though it lacks in originality, it easily makes that up with a really fun gameplay loop and humor. And when I say fun gameplay, I mean really fun. It's not the first, and it definitely won't be the last game to take the existing formula that works and add its own unique spin to it. If you enjoyed Breath of the Wild, I think you will like this game as well. I really don't have a lot of reasons to not recommend it. Only if you absolutely hate cartoony art styles in games or puzzles and platforming, like I said before. Other than that, I absolutely recommend this game. You can easily spend around 40 to 50 hours of gameplay, but this will heavily depend on your playstyle. You can't actually rush through the main story because you will feel a big power gap if you didn't upgrade your character. And it seems like the game will have more content further down the line, so if you end up liking it, you can look forward to that. That would be it for this video. If you enjoyed watching this video, pressing the thumbs up button would mean a lot. Don't forget to subscribe for more RPG content. If you want to support the channel in the long run, consider becoming a Patreon or a YouTube member. You can get your name on the end credits, as well as some other perks like early access to videos, Discord roles, my plans for future content, etc. That would be all, and I'll see you in the next one.